Welcome to the video on R. We're looking at assignment and naming in this video. So hopefully you've had a quick introduction to R Studio, which is the integrated development environment I'm going to be using. When you open up R Studio to begin with, it will show you these three windows. I'm going to also create a new R script file, and that will give us 4 windows. And just a quick review, in the upper left corner we're going to have our code file, so that's where we can write and save our code. In the lower left we have the console window. That's where we can our R code will execute, and any output generated by an R script will show up there. We can also do things like write simple R code and execute it immediately, which can be useful for testing out different statements and different instructions. In the upper right, we have the global environment, and that's actually our symbol table. It's going to show us all of the names and variables that we've defined and what their value is. And then in the lower right, we have a window which is the help window. It's also where plots will show up if you're going to plot things in R. It's also where you can manage R packages. Okay, so beginning with assignment and naming. I'm going to be typing code into the code file, and then as we run it, we'll see things show up in the symbol table or the global environment on the right. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign to the variable Frodo the value 1. Now R lets us do assignment in 2 different ways. I can assign using an equal sign. I can also assign using a 2-character symbol that looks like an arrow. And I'm going to use the arrow for this example simply because it really does a nice job of representing the way information flows in an assignment. Information always flows from the right side of assignment to the left, and whatever the value of the right side gets copied into the memory location attached to the name on the left side. And in R, a pound sign is a way to create a comment, and a comment is ignored by the R interpreter. And so I'm going to say this is an equivalent assignment using the equal sign. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and save my file, and I'm going to call it assign.r, and you need to save R files with a capital R as the suffix. Once I've saved the file, I can execute the entire file by clicking on the source button, and you can see that it executes the code in the console window, and then you can see in the global environment we end up with a variable named Frodo with the value 1. And so we're actually creating the symbol table as we go ahead and do the assignments. Then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to assign to Sam the value 2. And the other way that we can execute code in R is if I put the cursor on a line of code and click Run, it will execute just that line of code. And you can see that line of code showing up in the console, and then you can also see the result of that line of code showing up in the global environment symbol table. So now we have 2 variables, Frodo and Sam, and Frodo has the value 1 and Sam has the value 2. So now I'm going to assign to Mary the result of taking Frodo and whatever value is in Frodo and adding it to the value that's inside Sam. So what R is going to do now is it's going to use the global environment symbol table to look up the value of Frodo, which is 1, and look up the value of Sam, which is 2, and it's going to compute their sum, which is the value 3, and then it will take that value 3 and assign it to Mary. So if I click Run on that line of code, you can see it adds Mary to the symbol table because we've assigned a value to it, and it has the value 3. Now the assignment does not create a connection between Frodo, Sam, and Mary in this case. And we can see that because if I assign Frodo a new value of 10 and run that line of code, it changes the value of Frodo but does not change the value of Mary. And that's because assignment copies the value from the right side into the memory location attached with the name on the left side. And so on line 6, when we computed the value of Mary, the value 3 was computed from the right side and copied to the location associated with Mary. And so then when we later on change the value of Frodo, it overwrites the old value of Frodo, because we can't have two symbols with the same name in a global environment symbol table. So it overwrites the old value of Frodo and gives Frodo the value 10. Okay, now what happens if I try to assign to a variable another variable that doesn't yet exist? So in this case, I'm trying to assign to Mary, which does exist, the value that's in Pippin, but unfortunately Pippin does not exist. And so the R interpreter tells us this down in the console window, and it says error, object Pippin not found. And that's because Pippin doesn't yet exist in the global environment symbol table. So if I first assign to Pippin a value like 5, and then I run the reassignment of Pippin to Mary, then now both of those execute safely, and after assigning 5 to Pippin, it shows up in the global symbol table. And then after assigning the value of Pippin to Mary, Mary also takes on the value 5. If I then modify the value of Pippin to be 6, it does not change the value of Mary, because the assignment of Pippin to Mary did not create a connection between those two variables. It simply took whatever value Pippin was at the time and copied that value over to Mary. So when we reassign the value 6 to Pippin, it does not affect the value for Mary. Now, we can also do expressions that look a little funny in mathematics, where we say Pippin gets the value Pippin plus 1, but in computer science this is perfectly fine, because we evaluate the value of the right side first, and the value of Pippin is 6 to start, and so we take that value 6 and we add 1 to it to get 7, and so if I run this code, Pippin will take on the new value 7. And so then we can finish. I'm going to go ahead and clear the global environment. We can do that by clicking on the broomstick. And that's like we're starting fresh. None of the code has been executed. And now I'm going to go ahead and step through the code line by line the way the R interpreter would do so. And so we first create the variable Frodo with the value 1. Then we create the variable Sam with the value 2. And then we look up the values of Frodo and Sam, which is 1 and 2, add them together to get 3, and that value gets copied into the variable Mary. Then we reassign the value 10 to Frodo. Then we assign a new variable Pippin and give it the value 5. Then we copy the value of Pippin to the variable Mary, and then we reassign the value of Pippin to 6. Finally, we take the current value of Pippin, which is 6, add 1 to it, and reassign that back to the variable Pippin. And after rerunning all this code, we've rebuilt the global environment symbol table, and it tells us what all of the values are for these variables if I were to do anything with them on line 15. So for example, if I were to print the value of Frodo, it should print 10 to the console. And in fact, it does down here. So by understanding the symbol table and understanding how to read it, I can always predict what an assignment is going to do or what a print statement is going to do when I print out one of these variables. So to review, we've learned how to create variables by assigning a value to a name. We can see those names and their values in the global environment symbol table. R will always execute code in linear order, starting at the top of the file and moving down. An assignment always makes a copy of the right side and puts that copy into the memory location attached to the name on the left side. And so that's an introduction to assignment and naming using R and the IDE RStudio.